Hey y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey guys, welcome back into the Cover 3 College Football Podcast. I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Summer School. Today, we're going to be talking a little Tennessee, and you can see my background is different if you're watching us on YouTube at Cover 3 Podcast. That's because our studios are actually booked up here at 24/7 Sports, so I am coming to you literally in the state of Tennessee in the Country Music Television building from the Country Music Sirius XM CMT studio. If it looks a little different, if it sounds a little different, that's why, as opposed to our normal setup. To talk Tennessee today, though, we're going to go and bring on one of the foremost experts, Patrick Brown of GoVols247. Patrick, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Bud. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking some football today.
No doubt about it. Last year, really an excellent year for Tennessee and new coach Josh Heupel. I think all the power ratings had them as a legitimate top 20-ish team. I also have in my notes here that they caught UF when Florida was actually still trying. And so that was a very different team than if you got them, way late in the year. What's the overall mood there in Knoxville?
I think it's hopeful, Bud, but I also think there's a little bit of we've seen this movie before. Tennessee is run through a handful of coaches over the past decade or so, and there's always been this point where they win enough, or they get win some recruiting battles to get people sort of believing and buying into the future. And I think we're at that point with Tennessee and with Josh Heupel. Obviously, I think they exceeded expectations last season. The offense lived up to the billing that you expect from Josh Heupel with what he did at UCF. But they go out and they have a top 10 class, I think, as we're talking right now. Obviously, the headliner is Nico Iamaleava, the 5-star quarterback from California. That's obviously gotten a lot of more people on board, because coming in from UCF, that was a big question with Heupel, was can he recruit at this level? Can he recruit well enough to get Tennessee on similar footing with some of the other powers in the SEC? So I think the vibe around the program is hopeful and maybe cautiously optimistic. I do think Tennessee fans are realistic that there's a long way to go to get to Georgia and Alabama, who they obviously Tennessee has the luxury of playing every year. But I think there's some optimism, and inside the program there's a really good vibe. I think the culture has been was established last season and during Heupel's first year, and that can be one of the big steps that you can take as a new coach coming in.
No doubt about it. Look, you mentioned that offense, and last year, especially if you strip out the games in which they played Joe Milton the majority of the snaps, and you look just the games that Hooker played, and you control for pace. I mean, this was still a legitimate top 10 offense in the whole country. Hooker was just extremely good at maximizing the risk while not actually throwing the pick. I mean, I think it was 31-3 touchdown interception ratio. That's common sense. Hello, very, very good. And also he was effective on the ground with Small as well. They got to be just over the moon with his performance last year. And yet I'm curious, where can he improve?
Yeah, I think that's a big question that we've asked a lot, and that we've talked to Hendon about, and from talking to some coaches and talking to Hooker himself during spring ball, he really sort of rededicated himself. He almost came in this offseason with a blank slate, acted like last year didn't happen. He's not letting the success get to his head. He obviously flirted with maybe going into the NFL draft after last season, but decided to come back and use his extra year. And from talking to him and talking to people around the program, I think he's kicked it up a notch. Obviously, some things that they expect him to get better at is just a better comfort level in the offense. There's a lot of reads in this offense to what Josh Heupel does. A lot of what they do from play to play, because they're going so fast, is based on reads. What the defense is giving me, how many guys are in the box, what kind of coverage am I getting? All those things are, and they put a lot on the quarterback. So the longer you do something, the better theoretically you should get at it. And so that's what they're sort of pushing Hendon to go that way. Something that they talked about this spring was him being able to maybe manipulate defenses and maybe make them think that he's going here with the football, and instead he's going the other way. Little things like that. I think they have a better grasp now of how he is as a runner. He obviously is Tennessee fans like to compare him to Joshua Dobbs. I don't think he's as elite a runner as Josh Dobbs was, but he's up there. He's pretty close, and certainly you don't want to get your quarterback beat up too much, especially in the SEC. But something that I don't think they knew just from seeing him in practice where he's not live, where he can't get hit, seeing that part of his game come out last year. I think Tennessee knows now the best way to maybe utilize him and how they can use him in the run game that as an extra number and as a guy that can make defenses pay.
Yeah, his explosive run rates aren't huge, but the percentage of first down touchdown converted when he did decide to take off and scramble or even in some of the design run stuff was very high. Obviously, part of that, I think, an offensive line that played better than I thought they would last year, and now they return, I think, 6 of their top 7?
Yeah, it's 4 starters back. The only loss is Cade Mays, who was picked in the 6th round this past weekend.
I mean, that should be, I would think, an improved unit, even with the loss of Mays.
Yeah, they do have one. Obviously, they have got that tackle spot to fill, and based on what they did in the spring, they flipped Darnell Wright, the former 5-star who was at left tackle last season, did a pretty good job. They flipped him back over to right, which is where he started his first 2 years, and they looked at a couple of guys there at that left tackle spot. One of them is Jeremiah Crawford, who's a second-year junior college transfer, and the other is Gerald Mincy, a transfer from Florida that they recruited at UCF that they feel pretty good about. So it's probably going to be a 2-man battle between those 2 guys. There's another Dane Davis was a guy who was Cade Mays' backup last season. So I think that's one of the competitions, for probably the biggest one on offense that's going into the season. Once they get to camp, that's going to be probably the headline one on offense as they try to fill that last piece.
If that's the headline one on offense, is replacing Jones and Payton at receiver the headline 2 or 1B?
Yeah, I would say it's those 2. Those are the big ones. And with Jones, Bayless Jones was a really good player in the slot. And Javonte Payton was, his numbers weren't overwhelming, but his impact was. He was, I think, all 6 of his touchdowns came in the first 20 minutes of games, and Tennessee had the best first quarter scoring average in the country, and I think had the best first quarter scoring differential in the country, if I'm remembering correctly. So all his touchdowns were 35 plus yards, just about 2. So he was a big play guy with his speed. But they're sort of reshaping that group. Jalen Hyatt, I think, is poised to take over for Bayless Jones in the slot. Hyatt was a former 4-star guy, a lot of speed with him. Didn't have the year that a lot of people thought he was going to have last season, but he's been a guy that's really rededicated himself this offseason. Came in early January and has just basically lived in the complex. Him and Hendon Hooker have built a pretty good rapport. Both watched a lot of film together, throwing a lot. Sometimes it's just them, even back before the team really reconvened for the start of the offseason. But he's put on 20 pounds. He's up to 184. So they think he can play more physical and be able to hold up better in that part of the game. And at the other spot, they're in a good position, I think, with Brew McCoy, the transfer from USC. I think he would potentially come in if they do end up pulling that one out, and probably be the starter across from Cedric Tillman, who obviously is, having him back alleviates the loss of Bayless and Javonte. So if they get McCoy, I think he could be a starter. Ramel Keaton and some of those other guys that are returning had pretty good springs from what I heard. But we asked Josh Heupel a lot, how does your offense get better? What can you do differently in year 2? And he's always pointed to your personnel being different. And certainly, Bayless Jones and Jalen Hyatt are not the same. They're not the same player. And if you go from Payton to say Brew McCoy, and even Ramel Keaton's more of a, he's a longer guy, more of a, doesn't maybe have the breakaway speed that Payton does, but those are different pieces that you're going to have to find ways to use in your offense. So that's the 2 big question marks on offense going into the season for Tennessee are what they do at tackle, which is now left tackle instead of right tackle, which is where Cade May started last season. Also, what they do with those 2 wide receiver spots.
For sure. Let's go ahead and switch to the defense here. I had the defense power rated like top 50 ish, so not a bad defense, but not a real like dominant unit either last year. What do you see being materially different about this defense? I guess the one just that jumps off to me the screen is your top 3 guys up front from the defensive line, at least by snap count, maybe not by talent, are gone. Is that where you go with that probably?
Yeah, I think the big questions probably are maybe more. Well, there's really three questions with the defense, one at each level. One in the front is how are they going to get after the quarterback? Too often last year, their pass rush was inconsistent at best. It's funny, they set a school record and ranked in the top 10 in tackles for loss last season with I think 102. But they were middle of the pack in the SEC in sacks. So a lot of that was against the run and maybe even outside on some screens and stuff. But can they get after the quarterback? The guys you mentioned that are leaving, Matthew Butler was a fifth-round pick. He was great for them, tone setter of leadership. It's going to be tough to replace him. They've got some guys that have started and that have played at that, at those interior spots. But to me, when I look at the defensive line, it's all about the edge guys, and these guys need to be able to win. It's guys like Byron Young who shared the team lead in tackles for loss and sacks. I think he could have a really big year, potentially maybe even double-digit sacks if I think he's got that in him. And then Tyler Barron, who's a guy that was another former four-star recruiter under the old staff that he was kind of hit and miss last year. I don't think he was fully healthy, but he had that brief flirtation with the transfer portal back in January, but he's back and bought in. I think those are two guys that it starts with up front. And looking at the rest of the defense, they have to get better at linebacker. I think they have to get better at safety. They haven't really added anybody in from the portal at linebacker. So Jeremy Banks is the top guy there. I think he had 128 tackles. I think he's got a really high ceiling, chance to be a really good player. And then sort of the wild card with that group is Juwan Mitchell, who's the transfer they brought in from Texas last year. They got about 3 games out of him. His shoulder just wasn't ever right. And so he went on the shelf and underwent surgery, I think, in October. There was some question whether he was going to be bought in enough to stay. He has been bought in. He's not, he wasn't fully healthy in the spring, but he's a guy that you can almost look at as a new transfer just because you didn't get hardly anything out of him last season. And the secondary is probably the most intriguing part because they've added a couple transfers there. Wesley Walker was a starter at Georgia Tech. Andre Turrentine was a former 4-star guy that was just played his freshman year at Ohio State. So, but those guys I think are going to join the mix where you're replacing 2 draft picks, Alontae Taylor and Theo Jackson. So they each have to get better at each level for sure. And I think your characterization of a defense that's good but not great is accurate. And the question is, with the way that this offense plays, if you're playing defense, you're expecting every stop you get to be you're leading. You have a 7-point lead increase on the scoreboard. So they have to be a defense that generates negative plays. They have to be a defense that generates turnovers. They have to be a defense that stands up in the red zone and gets stops there. And we'll have to see if the personnel that they brought back and developed and the personnel that they brought in, particularly in the secondary, what impact those guys can have going into the season.
For sure. I mean, getting off the field in those longer down situations. I look at my numbers here.
They were really bad on third down last year.
Yeah, everything is sort of just okay, decent, good, a little below average, and then passing down success rate allowed, 103rd.
Yeah, that was a real struggle, and that goes back to the defensive line. Is you have to be able to win when you rush 4. You have to have guys off the edge that can win on one-on-one. You have to have guys that can make plays in the back end and guys that can hold up in coverage to where you don't have to play zone every time, right? The middle of the field, defending the middle of the field was really a trouble spot for Tennessee last year. Sort of that quartet with the 2 linebackers and the 2 safeties. That was an area that teams really went at and had a lot of that success on third down. So that's the big one. I look at that defense, and even in their close losses, they lost 3 games by, were 1-possession games: Ole Miss, Pittsburgh, and Purdue. And in each of those games, the defense gave the offense the ball back, I think, twice in the fourth quarter against Pittsburgh with a chance to tie. I think Ole Miss, they gave it to them 3 times with a chance to go take the lead, and the offense couldn't finish it. And then in the Purdue game, I think, they got – everybody looks back at that game. They gave up like 600-something yards, but there was a stretch in the third quarter that they got 3 straight stops, maybe an interception or 2 in there, and the offense couldn't build on the lead. So, but yeah, I think the third down defense is obviously, you ask any of the coaches this spring, that's the first thing out of their mouth. Have to get better on third down, have to be able to win with the pass rush of sending just 4 guys because, you need difference makers up front, but I also don't think they have the guys in the secondary that they can just go play one-on-one and blitz guys all day. So that's sort of the poison that you have to pick if you're Tim Banks and this defensive staff, just to, from a third down scenario to a third down scenario is how do you approach sending extra guys to try to get pressure, or do you sit back and try to play coverage and hope that one of your front 4 guys can get home?
It's going to be fascinating to watch how that evolves. I mean, you almost think if you're running a, can you call it like Baylor-esque system? I know it's not exactly the same thing, but a lot of the principles as far as tempo and field spacing are certainly similar there. And I think Heupel and Levy probably swapped notes a time or two when they were there at UCF. It almost makes more sense to play a little more aggressively, give up a few more explosives, but get the ball back to your offense even more, because under the theory that you're more comfortable playing a 15, 16 possession game than the opponent is. And you may not blink like they might. I feel like Kentucky gets a lot of love. South Carolina gets a lot of love with the transfer portal work they've done. But if Georgia faltered a lot, is Tennessee
a lot.
Right? I mean, I think I've got them for between like 7 and 9 regular season wins. Tennessee, not Georgia. Tennessee could sneak up there and be a division dark. I guess everybody other than Georgia is a dark horse, technically, right, in this division.
Right.
But
right.
There's no reason if Georgia really faltered a ton that Tennessee couldn't be that team to sneak up there, I guess, in the East.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of going into last season. You even if you were optimistic, you were looking at a handful of games as sort of those toss-up games, those either-or games. Those are going to be the games that determine whether you go 6-6 or maybe 8-4. I think 7 to 9 wins is probably right where I am too. I don't think it's realistic to expect them to beat Alabama or Georgia this season. I mean, on any given Saturday, I suppose that could happen, but I don't know that the any given Saturday really applies to those two elites right now. But you look at the games with Kentucky, South Carolina. They play Pittsburgh in the second week of the season. That's a toss-up game because it's up there. Because they play LSU out of the West this year, so they got to go down to Baton Rouge, which what are they going to look like under Brian Kelly in his first season? So there's a lot of those games that are sort of going to be those swing games that are going to be the difference in maybe winning 7 games or maybe winning 9-3 or even more. So could they be the dark horse? Like you said, I think everybody in the division is a dark horse. I do think there are some question marks on the defense. I wonder if they're going to be good enough to get enough stops to not put too much pressure on the offense to have to score every possession. And then, the offense, I think, has to get better in some of those situations because, like I mentioned, in some of those close games, in the SEC, that's what your record's going to hinge on is those close games, those crunch games, those games where it's down to a score in the fourth quarter. Can this offense execute well enough when teams aren't going to be giving up stuff that's going to let them throw it over the top, right? You're going to have to be able to execute for 8, 9, 10 plays to maybe get yourself in a position to kick a winning field goal or go score a go-ahead touchdown. So can they handle those situations better? And can they sort of deliver in those close games? Because there's going to be those games. That's going to be the difference, and that's going to be what defines, I think, this Tennessee team. Sort of in a way it was last season, but going into last season, you weren't really looking at it that way, right? You were wondering, can they scrape out 6 wins somewhere based on just the off season that they had. So I think 7 to 9 wins is a good range. The thing I will say about Tennessee is other than Alabama, what game are they going into next season thinking, all right, we don't have we have the advantage at quarterback, right? I mean, that's going to be, I think that's something that's big for them. And because, I think Hooker's probably maybe second or third best quarterback in the SEC. I know, Will Levis is getting a lot of love for some mock drafts early next year. And
that's projection though, isn't it? I mean, Will Levis was
right.
24 touchdowns, 13 picks. Hooker was 31-3. I mean, I'm
right. To me, it's either Hooker or KJ Jefferson, and their numbers are very, very similar based on last season, and
similar offenses too, somewhat.
Right. And say what you will about Stetson Bennett. I think if you took him and put him in another offense, it would be different. If you took other quarterbacks and put them with that team, with that defense, with the mindset you can only, you really only have to go score 21 points and you're going to win. So, I don't know. I think that's a big advantage for Tennessee going into next season, but I do wonder, can they get the defensive stops that they need? Can they get off the field on those third down situations? And in the moments when the offense has to go win the game, can they go do it? Because there were a couple of times where they came up short in that area. And like we said, that those tight games are going to be the difference in 7-5 and 9-3 or even better.
No doubt about it. Patrick Brown, bloodied and bruised because his 1-year-old headbutted him, came on the show anyway, really delivered the goods. Everybody needs to check out GoVols247. Hey, man, playing through it. And you got the 1-year-old playing to the echo of the whistle. So
Right.
awesome, man. Also, guys, go check out the GoVols247 podcast. Follow Patrick on Twitter. And we'll have to have you back on for a little quickie fall previews as well, Patrick. We really appreciate this.
Sounds good, bud. Appreciate it.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today. But don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. And we'll see y'all soon.